I heard my dad say it through the wall, and I remember thinking, maybe I misheard him. Maybe the words got scrambled somewhere between his mouth and my ears. Because what kind of father says that about his own daughter? Your sister? She's not getting a single dime, son. She made her choices. She's out. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the doorframe, the paint chipped at the corner where my brother used to scratch his height into the wall when we were kids. My feet wouldn't move. My dad's voice was so calm. That was the part that broke something in me. Not the words, but how easy they came out, like he'd been rehearsing. My brother said something low that I couldn't catch. Then my dad laughed. I walked back to the guest room, the one that used to be mine before I moved to Portland, and I sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark. My hands were folded in my lap like I was waiting for something. Outside, I could hear my mom moving around in the kitchen, the familiar sound of cabinet doors clicking shut. She knew. She had to know. She was in there making sweet tea like nothing had happened. I'd driven 11 hours to be here. My grandmother had passed 6 days earlier, quietly in her sleep, in the same house she'd lived in for 43 years. I'd been the one who called the hospice. I'd been the one who sat with her through the last 2 weeks, sleeping on the pull-out couch in her living room, heating up soup she couldn't finish, reading to her from the gardening catalogs she loved, even when she could no longer see the pictures clearly. My brother had sent flowers. Now I was sitting in the dark listening to my father cut me out of her estate, and somewhere in the back of my mind a very quiet, very steady voice said, "Write it down." So I did. I should explain something about my grandmother. Her name was Edna. She was 79 years old, and she had been the one constant in my life that never wavered. When my parents went through their bad years, and there were bad years I don't talk about, I stayed with her for whole summers. She taught me how to make pie crust from scratch, how to balance a checkbook, how to spot a person who was lying to you by the way they held their shoulders. She used to say, "People tell on themselves eventually. You just have to be patient enough to watch." She was sharp until almost the end. That's what made what my family did so much worse. About 8 months before she died, my grandmother asked me to help her get her affairs in order. She was already slowing down. The small strokes had started, just little flickers of confusion that lasted a few seconds and then passed. She knew what was coming. She was practical about it in the way that women of her generation sometimes were, as if grief were a task to be organized rather than felt. We sat at her kitchen table for 3 weekends in a row. She told me what she wanted done with the house, the savings, the jewelry, the car. She had a lawyer she trusted, a man named Mr. Calloway, who had an office downtown and had handled her affairs for almost 2 decades. She called him herself and made the appointment. I drove her there. After the appointment, we stopped at a diner, and she ordered black coffee and a slice of lemon meringue pie, which she ate slowly, and she told me she felt better, like she'd set something down that had been heavy. "I just want it to go where I intended," she said. "That's all I'm asking." I told her it would. I believed that. The reading of the will was scheduled for the Thursday after the funeral. My parents, my brother, and I gathered in Mr. Calloway's waiting room, which smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner. My mom had dressed up. My brother was scrolling his phone. My dad sat with his arms crossed, looking at a framed print on the wall, like he had somewhere better to be. I'd brought a notepad out of habit. I work in accounting. I take notes. Mr. Calloway came out and shook everyone's hand, and we went into the conference room, and he opened a folder and started reading. The house went to a historic preservation nonprofit that my grandmother had chosen herself. She'd talked to me about that. She'd seen too many old homes in her neighborhood get torn down, and she wanted this one used for something. Her savings, just under $90,000, were divided. $60,000 to a scholarship fund at the community college she'd attended in 1963, $15,000 to her church, and $15,000, split equally between her 2 grandchildren. That was me and my brother, $7,500 each. That was it. Clean. Simple. Exactly what she'd told me sitting at her kitchen table. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom looked at her hands. My brother put his phone away. No one said anything in the room. But on the drive home, in the car I wasn't in, apparently quite a lot was said. I know what was said because my brother told me. Not right away. It took him 4 days. But he came to find me at the coffee shop where I was working on my laptop, and he sat down across from me, and he wouldn't look at me directly. And he said, "I need to tell you something." He told me that our dad had been on the phone with Mr. Calloway's office the day after the reading, that he believed there was a more recent version of the will, that the house proceeds should have gone to family, not some nonprofit, that there might be grounds to contest. I asked my brother if he thought that was true. He looked at the table. "Dad has documents," he said. "What documents?" "He says Grandma signed something. Last fall. When you were helping her." I set my coffee cup down very carefully. "He says she wasn't in her right mind then," my brother continued. He said she was being influenced. The word sat between us like something dropped on the floor. "By me," I said. My brother didn't answer, which was its own answer. I thought about my grandmother at that diner table, eating lemon meringue pie, telling me she felt better. I thought about the way she'd signed the paperwork, with her left hand braced on the edge of the desk, careful and deliberate. I thought about how she'd told me, without me asking, that she was leaving the house to the nonprofit because she'd wanted to for years, and my parents had always talked her out of it. "He's going to file a challenge," my brother said. "He wanted me to know," he said. He stopped. "What did he say?" He pressed his lips together. "He said you don't deserve anything anyway, that you moved away, you barely visited, and whatever you got out of helping her you already got." I nodded slowly. "Are you okay?" my brother asked. "I'm making notes," I said, and I picked up my pen. Here is what my father didn't know. Here is what none of them knew. My grandmother had been worried about exactly this, not about me specifically. She trusted me. She was worried about the pressure that would come after she was gone. The way grief and money had a tendency to make people rewrite the past in their own favor. She'd seen it happen in her own family, years before I was born. She'd mentioned it more than once. So when she met with Mr. Calloway, she had done something extra. She'd requested that the entire appointment be recorded, audio and video, as was her legal right. She'd signed a statement of testamentary capacity that same day, witnessed by 2 people unconnected to our family, a notary and a neighbor who'd known her for 30 years. She'd also written a personal letter, sealed, to be opened in the event of any legal challenge, explaining her reasoning for every decision in the will. Mr. Calloway had all of it on file. I knew about it because she told me. She told me in the car on the way home, like she was sharing a small secret. "I like to cover my bases," she said, and she smiled out the window at the passing neighborhoods. I had written it down in my notepad that same evening. The date, what she said, where we'd been. I'd been doing that for months. Every visit, every conversation, every time she told me something about what she wanted. Not because I was suspicious of anyone at the time, just because I'm an accountant. I document things. My dad filed the challenge 3 weeks after the funeral. He claimed the will had been signed under undue influence. He claimed my grandmother had shown signs of cognitive decline serious enough to call her capacity into question. He cited a doctor's visit from the previous spring as evidence. I called Mr. Calloway the same afternoon I found out. He already knew. He had been expecting something like this, he said. He asked me if I still had my notes. I told him I had everything. He told me not to worry. Then he paused and added, "Your grandmother was a very careful woman." I said I knew. I'd learned it from her. What happened next took about 4 months. My dad hired a lawyer, a guy who specialized in estate disputes, the kind with a firm name that had 3 surnames in it, and an office on the 14th floor. He submitted the challenge formally. He got a statement from a cousin of my grandmother's, who claimed she'd seemed confused at a family event 2 years earlier. He submitted the doctor's visit records. In response, Mr. Calloway submitted the recording from the appointment. 47 minutes of my grandmother, clear and precise, explaining her decisions in her own voice, asking questions, pushing back on a clause she didn't like, requesting a change to the language around the scholarship fund. You could hear her laughing at one point, at something Mr. Calloway said. She sounded like herself. Completely, unmistakably like herself. He submitted the notarized capacity statement. He submitted her personal letter, and I submitted my notes. 14 months of dated entries, conversations, her exact words, her reasoning. the notary's name she'd mentioned, the date of the appointment, the diner afterward. Lemon meringue pie. My brother's lawyer withdrew within 6 weeks of seeing the documentation. I don't know exactly what conversation happened between my brother and my dad after that. I wasn't there. What I know is that my brother called me on a Sunday morning, and the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry." And he sounded like he meant it, which surprised me more than anything else in those 4 months. He told me he'd known something was off from the beginning. He told me he'd let himself get pulled along because he didn't want to be the one to push back. He said he was ashamed of that. I listened. I didn't fill the silence with reassurances he hadn't earned yet. But I didn't hang up either. We talked for almost an hour. My dad never called. I wasn't surprised. I'd stopped expecting it somewhere around the 3rd week of the challenge, when his lawyer sent a letter calling my grandmother's judgment compromised by prolonged exposure to a financially motivated party. That party was me. His daughter. Financially motivated for $7,500, which barely covered the gas and the time off work, and the months of watching someone I loved get smaller and quieter and more fragile. I stopped being sad about my dad somewhere in that process. I don't know exactly when. It wasn't a decision I made. It was more like setting something down because your arms are tired and realizing you don't need to pick it back up. My mom texted me in November. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said things had been complicated. I didn't respond right away. I spent a few days sitting with what I wanted to say, and then I wrote back. "I know they have. Take care of yourself." That was true. I did hope she'd take care of herself. But I wasn't going to perform forgiveness I didn't have yet just to make someone else comfortable. The scholarship fund my grandmother set up made its first award the following spring. A girl from the east side of town, 19 years old, going into nursing. The community college sent out a small announcement. I saw it because someone tagged the foundation's page. Her name was listed. The scholarship was listed as the Edna May Scholarship for first-generation students. I sat with that for a long time. My grandmother had told me, at that kitchen table, that she had been the first person in her family to attend college. That she'd worked the front desk at a medical office to pay for it. That no one had helped her. Not financially, not emotionally, and that she had always believed if someone had, her life might have opened up differently. This was her way of opening something for someone else. I thought about what my dad had tried to do with that. How he'd tried to pull it apart, redirect it, make it about something smaller and uglier, and how it had survived him because my grandmother had been smarter and more careful than he'd counted on. That felt like her, too. Right until the end, covering her bases. People sometimes ask me, friends who know the broad strokes of what happened, how I held it together during those 4 months, like I had some secret reserve of calm. The truth is I didn't feel calm. I felt furious, actually, in a very quiet way. The kind of fury that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. It just keeps writing things down and answering emails promptly and showing up to every meeting prepared. I think my grandmother gave me that. Not the fury, but the understanding that preparation is a form of love. That paying attention to details is how you protect the people and the things that matter. That documentation isn't cynical. It's care. She'd spent 43 years in that house being underestimated by various people in various ways. She'd outlasted every single one of them. She died with her affairs in order and her intentions intact. And when someone tried to rewrite what she'd wanted, there was a 47-minute video recording and a notarized statement and 14 months of dated notes standing in the way. That wasn't luck. That was her. I kept the $7,500 in a separate account for almost a year, untouched. I wasn't sure what felt right to do with it. Eventually, I used part of it to take a long weekend trip to the town in Georgia where my grandmother grew up. I'd never been. I drove around and found the neighborhood she'd described to me once, walked the block where she said her mother had kept a garden. I sat in a diner, different state, same kind of institution, and ordered pie because that felt like the right thing to do. I thought about her sitting at her own kitchen table, explaining her will to me, calm and deliberate and certain. I thought about the word my dad had used, influenced. And I thought, yes, absolutely, every good thing in me she had a hand in. I left a tip bigger than the check. The way she always did, because she said you could tell a person's character by how they treated someone who couldn't do anything for them. Then I got in my car and I drove back to Portland and I called my brother and we talked the way we hadn't talked since we were kids, easy and long and without anything unsaid between us. That felt like a beginning. Not everything heals, but some things start to. I think she would have said that too if I'd asked her. I think she would have smiled and looked out the window at whatever was passing. And she would have said something practical and true. So I'm still writing it all down.